Hello and welcome to News Roast. I'm Julian Rubinstein.
I'm Heydon Prowse.
This week we've got another live episode for you. So, hey, you spoke to Lauri Love.
I did. I was lucky enough to host a discussion with Lauri Love at Shoreditch House. Thank you, Shoreditch House, for that. Lauri Love is a sort of fascinating hacktivist who was recently... Well, the American government tried to extradite him to the US for stealing data from the US Army, the Missile Defense Agency, and NASA.
That's insane.
And he luckily won his trial, so he will remain here in the UK. But he's a fantastically interesting guy, super smart, super bright. And yeah, I'm excited for you to hear this pod.
Doesn't talk to many people, like massive scoop on that one.
Big scoop, yeah. Enjoy. I'm sure perhaps you're all here because you've read about Lauri Love. You might have seen his case recently. He was fighting extradition to the United States. You're probably also aware of other British hackers like Gary McKinnon who also fought extradition. It's a huge issue right now, not just legally, but also it's an issue for all of us in relation to what we've been seeing with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook on our TVs recently in the news. I think this is something that is kind of at the forefront of all my minds. It's changing the way politics is working, it's changing the way international legislation is working, and your case is a bit of a landmark case. And there's only a certain amount Lauri can actually talk about it, so we're going to come to that gradually, but I thought we'd start off talking with you first about how you first got into hacking, what it was that inspired you about it. You know, you suffer from Asperger's, and a bit about that and your education, and what was it that fascinated you about getting into systems?
So my dad was a computer geek in the sort of 80s and 70s before they had the internet. So he had an Atari ST, which some of you might remember is a very old computer. And I used to help him install software and stuff on it, and he sort of showed me the ropes a little bit. And at some point we got MSX computer, which was popular in Eastern Europe, and my mum's from Finland. So we were on holiday in Finland and we stayed up very late at night copying about 700 games because they had a thriving video game sharing community in Scandinavia. And me and my sister used to play these games, and at some point I realised that it's not fun losing a video game, it's a lot more fun winning a video game. And I realised at some point that you can list the rules, of these games. You could list the code, and if you stopped it, if you pressed the right button at the right time just as you were losing, it would kind of spit out the line number, and you could just faff around with that of it, and eventually you would change the rules so you didn't die when the monster kind of hit you. And from that kind of feeling of elation of realising that so there's how it's supposed to work, but here's how I want it to work, and I can figure out the process between A and B, I moved on to writing games, writing fake viruses on the BBC microcomputer that I used to have at school, have it cycle through all the colours and say this is a virus and get yourself off the lesson for that day. Computers were just a way that I expressed myself and understood the universe, because I was more interested in things and information than I got on well with people as a child. It's taken me a while to develop social skills because of my autism. And so through computers, I gained a kind of mastery and ability to wield creative power through the imagination, and then the internet came along, and through the internet I got involved.
The world was your oyster.
Yeah. So in the 90s, when you still had to dial up the internet and listen to modem noises, and it was even, for me, that involved also running phone cables under the carpet, so my parents didn't know that I was on the internet in the middle of the night. And from there was a lot of kind of one of the early genres was secret knowledge, or things that are cool to know that not a lot of people know. Like you could put a magnet next to a vending machine back in the 90s, not now, and get free things from it because you just gunk up the mechanism at the right place and the coin would drop through. And that led on to video games cheats, and that led on to hacking as a...
What was the name of the early hacker? He's considered one of the first hackers who used to get a Cheerios box and hum the sound down the phone. He used to get free calls, because if you made the right tone, it would connect to the switchboard.
His name was Captain Crunch. This was called phreaking. Back in the day, the phone network was switched by tones that were played along it that would tell the various switches along the network to route this connection to here, go into this trunk line and then come out here. And if you didn't want to pay for long distance phone calls because it's the 80s and they're very expensive, and you knew the right things, or if you're friends with Steve Wozniak, one of the co-founders of Apple, who used to make these little boxes and sell them to raise pocket money, you could assemble a device that would emit a particular frequency, 2600 hertz. And funnily enough, there was a cereal brand called Captain Crunch.
Not Cheerios. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's equivalent to Cheerios. And it had this little toy whistle in it. And this guy, Captain Crunch, figured out that if you blow this whistle, it produced just that right magic tone, and that would go from you just being talking on the phone to you being in charge of the phone, network at large. And people had a lot of fun with this. People used to get through to the White House and the Pentagon and call up, somebody called up the president and got through to his undersecretary and tried to get some pizza from him or something like very silly stuff. And you could have conference calls with all your hacker friends around the world, and it would be paid for by Bell Systems, who had a monopoly and had lots of money, and it was fine. But yeah, that's classic.
There's a lot of mischief to a lot of this stuff. A lot of you talk about the video games as a route into this, but it's very similar to a lot of other hackers. They have very similar sort of paths in, trying to work out hacks and cheats of video games that then led them onto bigger and bigger systems, and eventually websites, potentially government-owned websites, whatever. Like, that's quite a sort of classic route in, isn't it, to the whole world?
It's very common, because the point I was saying to Heydon earlier, the point of a video game is anything you can do within the game that helps you win is okay, because if you weren't supposed to do it, the game wouldn't allow you. Unlike in chess, where you can make a wrong move and the opponent has to say, no, you can't do that. So a natural extension is, because many video games are competitive and you're playing World of Warcraft and you're fighting another guild, or you're playing Call of Duty and you're fighting a angry adolescent child on another continent, and sometimes maybe your aim isn't that good, but you can beat them by knocking them off the network, by sending lots of packets at them, or by running a cheat thing that gives you the ability to shoot through walls and see through obstacles, and people see that as an extension of the game, and that's borderline grey stuff. And then it's not borderline if you're DDoSing someone to stop them from being able to use the network. That's an actual crime, but it's a bit of a grey fuzzy area, and people can veer into, I guess, technical legal transgressions just by extending this game.
Joel.
Hey.
We have to stop the podcast for a second because I'm quite excited about this. There's a fantastic new play coming to the Playhouse Theatre about the Calais jungle. And I know the guys that are doing it, and it's fantastically exciting. I'm very excited about this.
So this is the play about the jungle, right?
That's right.
Is set in Calais.
It's set in the Calais migrant camp, which is the refugee camp that became known by the same name. You probably remember it. It was started in March 2015, destroyed in October 2016. It's an immersive theatre experience, which I think is fantastically exciting. People can go and feel what it's like to be in the Calais jungle.
It's a very strange thing, isn't it, that it only really was a camp between March 2015 and October 2016.
And so many moving stories there, having been there myself. I met these guys. In fact, I met them on the day they set up their theatre.
Did you?
It's written by a guy called Joe Murphy and Joe Robertson, who actually, they lived in the camp for 7 months.
Wow.
And they established this theatre, which I saw them setting up, called the Good Chance Theatre. This was originally set up as a space for sort of expression in the camp for young refugee actors who came through and needed a way to sort of, express themselves and get some of the traumatic experience they'd gone through out.
Not being a total snowflake, but it's actually where I actually broke down. I saw these kids just playing a drama game.
Yeah.
And it just totally fucking broke me. It was
emotional
ridiculous
stuff. If the play's anything like that, I'm sure it'll be really good.
Good for people as well who never went there and actually sort of maybe had their own doubts, because I imagine some of the stories are...
Get some Daily Mail readers down there. Change
Katie Hopkins, free tickets for Katie Hopkins.
It's co-directed by Stephen Daldry, no less, and Justin Martin, whose work you're probably already familiar with through their own individual projects.
What's great about the show is that the Playhouse Theatre, where it's going to run, will undergo a complete transformation in the true immersive style, and will feature the Afghan Cafe, which was one of the many restaurants on the camp, taking the audience right into the heart of life in the jungle.
Ticket prices start at £15 and 40% of the tickets on offer are just £25 and under. It's getting 5-star reviews across the board, so make sure you head down to thejungleplay.co.uk for more details and to reserve your seats.
That's thejungleplay.co.uk. Boom!
Because you were talking about something that's sort of a key sort of Asperger's symptom. Is that you find it hard in social situations to work out boundaries and cues, whereas with computers, it's all sort of very clear and laid out, and you know what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do because the code tells you. And so that's why a lot of people find their sort of their worlds in hacking, and they is that right?
Yeah, so certainly, I mean, as I said, navigating social situations when I was a child was a lot harder than navigating a set of Lego bricks or some other system of information that you could just formalize and systemize and do things with. So computers allow more expression. The difficulty with computers and the law is it's less clear sense of boundaries. So as I said, with the video game, you just go from trying to win by shooting better to trying to win by cheating a little bit, and it's not very clear that you've crossed any kind of social boundary. And with Facebook or any other website, you're accepting a terms of service, and there is a lengthy list of things telling you what they can do and what you can do, and nobody has read any of one of those unless you're really kind of insane or masochistic or a lawyer. And so we're all potentially transgressing every time we use an internet service, especially people with Asperger's or autistic people who don't pick up naturally the sense of what is okay and what's not okay. And when you interact with a website and you make it do something a bit more fun than what it's supposed to do, that's less obviously a crossing of a boundary than if you're in a supermarket and you go from the aisle and into the staff-only area and start routing around the warehouse or whatever. There's more obvious visual cues of that this is a line that you don't cross. So there's a big problem with people, especially through video games, not understanding the consequences of what they're doing. And there are also some people that, for whatever reason, aren't particularly swayed by, so they might understand on a conscious level, I'm not supposed to do this, but they don't have a strong sense, and therefore I shall not. And that's not something that's equally shared by all types of people, depending on their mental makeup. I personally am quite extreme. I'm completely anti-authoritarian. If something doesn't make sense to me, then I won't accept it, and I will do things if they make sense to me. And so all of my morality and ethics has to be explicitly, consciously wrought out, and I don't just kind of stick to convention as easily as people, non-neurodiverse people.
But this is one of the problems, isn't it? And it's been one of the problems in the prosecution of hackers, because government is very much catching up, because you have all these huge online systems that came online very fast, and people were sort of catching up, trying to work out how to protect them from hacking. They were trying to work out fix the holes, these huge gaping holes that were there. And you're sort of there online, or other hackers are there sort of online, potentially having a little route around, working out what these things are and where the holes might be. And no one's telling you not to go through a hole, and it's there. So why would you not?
Yeah, I mean,
or why would one not? Sorry,
in fact, these days, so we used to have the problem in the 90s where, so I was hacking things in the 90s, online. It didn't really matter as much then because there wasn't a lot of money going through the web. It was somebody's, knitting circle, or even the New York Times website. You could change the front page and it wouldn't really cost them any money because no one was visiting it.
Just change the whole front page of the New York.
It was just a laugh, it's fine. But then things got more and more serious, but they didn't get more and more secure.
Yeah.
And so you used to have a problem. So I'd report vulnerabilities because I got into, it's past the statute of limitations now, so I can just say, I was like 14 or something, and I hacked into one of the largest ISPs in the UK, and didn't do anything.
What's an ISP?
Internet service provider. So it was actually a hosting, so they provided, they ran websites for people, and it was one of the biggest ones in the UK. And immediately when I got in and got root, which is kind of the super user, the all-powerful user on the network, I sent a message to the admin saying, I've got root on your computer, you probably don't want this. Do you want to meet me on this chat room and I'll explain how I did it and you can fix it? And, I was just trying to do a good deed in that way. And instead of them engaging, they just kind of pulled the plug, as we say, and then the whole thing went dark, and the website wasn't up for a few weeks while they panicked. And they would have tried to prosecute me, but I was 15, so we just didn't have internet for a year because BT were like, no more of that. And that was the end of it. So there's a lot of problem, even to this day, with security researchers trying to submit information about a vulnerability or a misconfiguration or massive amounts of data being just available because it's been not secured. They can still be threatened with legal action, but it's getting better. So nowadays, companies actually do want you to hack them. They just want you to do it within parameters. So
they want you to
want
find
you
the holes for them.
So the irony in my case is, for those of you who don't know the background of my extradition case, I'm accused of hacking a laundry list of US government networks and systems in protest after the tragic death of a young man called Aaron Swartz, who the Department of Justice hounded to death for very silly reasons. And this includes the Pentagon and various military things.
Do you want to just, I mean, how much can you talk about that and what the list of...
The FBI, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Department of Energy, the Pentagon Strategic Studies Institute, Missile Defense Agency, Health and Human Services, a bunch of the other army things.
Various other small websites.
Yeah, just some fiddling stuff like that. But so in the extradition case, their theory is that I owe them $60 million or something ridiculous like this for having done this. But then 2 years later, they started a program where they will pay people to do exactly the same thing, which is compromise their system in a way that makes it obvious how they did it. And
very mixed messages.
So the incentive system is changing, and it is actually better to provide an incentive for people to responsibly disclose vulnerabilities and weaknesses and enter into a system called a bug bounty, where here's the bug, here's what you messed up, here's how I found it out, here's how you can replicate and confirm this issue, and they'll say, great, that's worth $500, $1,000. Some of them go up to $100,000 if it's, say, a bug in an iPhone or something like that. And this means instead of people finding these things and doing pranks or selling that information to organised crime or deleting things because they want to see the world burn, they're much more inclined to disclose that information, and then it gets fixed.
There's more of an incentive for them to go to the government institution about it or whatever, or the company, and tell them, this is your hole, can I have my $5,000 please?
And it's a carrot and stick thing, because the attitude of governments to unauthorised hacking was very much similar to the attitude of the US government to use of controlled substances, which is we'll try and scare them straight, we'll crack down, you'll go to jail for 10 years for having 2 joints, and that will teach the kids not to do it. And obviously
99 years and sentences like that for hacking, like real draconian, because they're panicking, they don't know what to do.
Yeah, but it's a kind of fear similar to how witches were feared because people didn't understand sanitation, and they thought a bunch of people got disease in this town, they don't understand that was a poisoning or that was a lack of hygiene, so we'll blame it on the scary woman that lives in the corner that's a bit weird. And it's a case of ignorance leading to fear, leading to an attempt to control through aggressive actions.
It's really interesting. Misha Glenny talks about this in his book on the Darknet from years ago, when this stuff was just starting to sort of come to public consciousness. He talks about, if you put a hacker like you, if you had the skills that you have online in the real world, you would literally be able to jump over buildings. You would basically have superhuman skills, which is an incredible, for someone that perhaps suffers from Asperger's or other socially alienating conditions. Having a skill like that, you can imagine what that does to a teenager that perhaps doesn't fit in socially in the real world, and suddenly they're able to do things that nobody else can do in this online world.
Yeah, I mean, to understand kind of how people get dragged in and end up going a bit too far with online shenanigans, it's, as you say, it's often people that have been misfits or don't have difficulties socially, or do not have much status, or have a lot of intelligence but it hasn't been harnessed because of difficulties in school, difficulties in human resources, job market. Suddenly they find, as you say, that they have a kind of superpower, they kind of do magical things, and there's a bit of a transition to I'm the underdog to I'm the top dog, and now you're gonna learn.
And we were talking about LOLSec, and a lot of these guys. I don't know if everyone remembers LOLSec. They were a sort of very mischievous, funny hacking group that they did a lot of quite high-profile hacks. And I don't know if did some of them go to jail?
Yeah, so
but they're all now working for big institutions.
So not for very long time. The longest sentence was 36 months, so just about 1.5 years inside a prison. But they're rehabilitated. They were never, as I would say, traditional criminals. So a traditional criminal, in my analysis, isn't lawyer speak or anything, but is someone who breaks a law for personal gain, to profit, to achieve something by fraudulent means. Whereas a prankster is someone who likes playing jokes and in the case of Lulsec, doesn't mind those jokes being facilitated by using other people's computers in a way that they didn't anticipate or particularly want. But it was all very humorous stuff, and I think that's why they've been feted and courted by media and the establishment. So I'm friends with most of these guys. Jake Davis he's now a media personality. He is the director of hacking at Spyscape, a kind of museum spying that's just opened in New York and is going to open in London. Two of the other guys do penetration testing. One of them teaches academically.
For who? Who do they do penetration testing?
For a variety of clients. So penetration testing is legal hacking. It's when companies say, come in, do your worst, don't set anything on fire, but just go nuts and let us know, again, how you do it. In a more formal way than this bug bounty kind of thing. And
again, a kind of sort of mixed message. They've got probably quite well-paying jobs now in the corporate sector because they did semi or very illegal things for years. Yeah. That was their reward.
Yeah, so it's strange, and it's similar in my case. There's a lot of people that are interested in me contributing to security and discussing various topics, and the only entry on my CV that makes that a thing that people are interested in is America trying to lock me up for the rest of my life. And so there is this paradox between the state and to a lesser extent now, but corporations historically have been very scared of these people, but also desperately require the skills that they have. And so so you might go to jail for a while, but then your career gets potentially a lot easier, although there are trust issues if you have been convicted of a crime. But I mean, it's not negatively influenced the Lultec people. And,
as long as you don't get extradited.
Yeah.
Right.
So maybe, we want to avoid people being destructive online. We do want to avoid criminality from a social point of view, but it's maybe better to steer people that have these talents in the right direction than to use the stick and try and beat them down for using their talents in the wrong way. And we do have a reality that the internet has collided with our lives, and data affects every aspect, whether you can go out and spend money tomorrow because you probably don't have cash and you use the magic card, and whether you can get a flat or a mortgage. It all depends on numbers in a machine somewhere, and that security hasn't really kept up with the amount of influence that technology has on our lives. So there's a desperate shortage in people that have information security skills or natural talents for it, and so there is a tendency to snap people up that can do it. And one of my concerns going forward is to try and find people that might have been drawn waywardly into malicious or criminal hacking and to steer them in the right direction and to try and cultivate their skills to avoid them going through an ordeal like I have.
I love the story we were talking about just before, which I love, which is again is Misha Glenny's story about this super hacker. I think they nicknamed him Superman, back in the sort of mid-noughties when people really didn't understand what was going on, and the CIA had these huge holes in its website, and he was like a sort of patriot hacker, and he'd be paid to stress test all these systems. But because he was such a patriot, he left a very small hole in the CIA's system so he could get back in and just check no one was doing anything naughty in there. Yeah. They found it, locked him up for 5 years, and guess who found him in jail? A fraudster that put him up in a massive studio flat and got him to hack into all the biggest banks in America for about 5-6 years, and he stole hundreds of millions, and no one could ever catch him. You don't want to create enemies out of these people. Because
you can have a massive false economy by taking someone that has shown some hacking capability, has not done anything too terrible, and then putting them amongst a bunch of criminals that will very easily understand the utility of their skills and will, as you say, recruit them. And we see this when people play with hacking through video games or through forums, just trying to develop skills. There are people who watch those forums that are in organised crime, and they will steer them in that direction, and it does pay pretty well. A lot of these it's a thriving industry, and a lot of these people have difficulties finding real legitimate jobs. And if somebody says, hey, this thing you were doing for fun because you wanted to show those people in that other clan that you were better than them, I will pay you large amounts of money to do that. And if nobody's making a better offer from within society, industry, or government, then they're going to go that way. It's just a matter of where the incentives are.
So up until quite recently, the trend has been to have these hugely draconian sentences. We had an extradition treaty with the US where, I mean, actually, I'll let you talk about that, but they were essentially allowed to come over here, pluck anyone they wanted, take them back to the US justice system and prosecute them without giving any information as to what the evidence was that was alleged against the alleged offender.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, extradition has been around for a long time, and the idea is you can't, you know, break the law, commit a crime, and then, you know, cross a border and hope to get away with it. It's for returning people to the locus of the offending where they committed the crime to answer to the charges. At some point, you know, thanks to the helpful intervention of Tony Blair and George W. Bush, this got generalised beyond returning people to where they committed a crime to allowing a worldwide jurisdiction for one legal system, which is the United States. And then to make matters worse, in the 2003 extradition treaty negotiated between Blair and Bush governments, they removed the requirement for any evidence to be produced. So I've just won an appeal against extradition. It's been a 3-year ordeal. I've been facing, you know, potential 99-year sentence in the USA. I wouldn't make bail. I wouldn't get a trial because 97% of people plead guilty, and in my case, bizarrely enough, they reserved the right to try me 3 times over because they were extraditing me to 3 different states in parallel. So if I got on that plane, I'd be completely fucked, for want of a better word, and there'd be no trial, and that's me gone in jail for
why is it mostly plea bargains when these people that get extradited?
So the big structural problem with the US federal criminal justice system is there's a massive leeway for prosecutors to pile on charges or to pile on less charges, and so, you know, in the words of The Godfather, they kind of make you an offer you can't refuse, and that's, in my case, you know, instead of going to jail for potentially 99 years and having 3 trials and being detained the entire time, wouldn't you like to go to jail for a maximum of, you know, 20 years, but not have a right to a trial? And it's a very efficient system, and so 97% of people do not make it to trial. They will plead out, and so all of the people in this room, if you're all being prosecuted, 1, maybe 2 of you, if you were lucky, maybe 3, if you were very lucky, would actually get to trial, and that's quite concerning. And in my case, all of this happened on a completely hypothetical, basis of argument. They read some charges and said that I did some very serious things, and at no point was any evidence brought forth to back.
So you still haven't seen any of the evidence?
So it's completely unsubstantiated, and this is the reason I can't talk about even, you know, whether or not I was involved in any of the things that are being alleged, because no case has actually been made to me yet, and this is a problem with extradition. I was arrested in 2013 by the National Crime Agency. They should have charged me under UK law, but America, for whatever reason, didn't want me to be tried here, and said we'll have an extradition instead, and so no evidence has been produced to this day. And so I've got no idea whether I committed any crimes or not.
And just explain a little bit what would have happened had you been extradited. So you'd have found yourself in a federal prison, no access to computer or the internet.
Yeah, so I'd go straight to probably the Metropolitan Detention Centre in New York, which is not a nice place. It's currently subject to 2 class action lawsuits by previous detainees because of terrible conditions. A judge recently refused to send someone there because it's not a place fit for human beings. So I'd go straight there. They'd make a decision of where to try me first. New York, Southern District of New York requested my extradition, District of New Jersey requested my extradition, and the Eastern District of Virginia requested my extradition. So I would... And
could all those 3 states could impose separate sentences on you?
Yeah, I mean, it would be 3 separate trials in effect if I tried to fight it. So even if I knew 100% that I could prove that I hadn't committed these crimes, I could still be in pre-trial detention for 3 consecutive trials for maybe 5-10 years. And the problem with trying to fight a case with computer charges from prison is So computer prosecutions entail a lot of data because all of the evidence is large amounts of data. So if you're trying to find it from jail, they will kind of throw, and this happened in the case of a friend of mine, Jeremy Hammond, and they throw millions and millions of pages of evidence at him, and they say, you're welcome to look at it all to prepare your defence, but you can't use a computer, you're in prison, you can ask for printouts of these individual pages, you can see your lawyers for an hour every week, so you're completely screwed. There'd be no chance. Even I, who very stubborn person by disposition, even I would have taken a plea bargain had I gone to America, and I'm not at all convinced that I've committed any crimes. So it's a troubling system, and why the case has been useful is it's set a precedent to avoid this in future. So it builds upon a previous case of Gary McKinnon, who you might have heard of. He was another young lad with autistic lad with Asperger's syndrome. He also, I forgot to mention NASA earlier when I was listing my alleged victims, but yeah, he was also accused of breaking into NASA and the Pentagon, and his reasoning was he was looking for evidence of aliens, and I've spoken to him, and this is completely plausible. I think he did believe, he still believes to this day that he found evidence of aliens.
He said there are aliens?
Oh, he said he found a spreadsheet and it listed the extraterrestrial officers that live on Mars or something. I don't know. I've not checked this out independently, but so they tried to request his extradition. He would have been facing again decades in prison, and then he lost all stages in the court at appeal at the Supreme Court, tried to get to the European Court of Human Rights. It was rejected, so he was nearly at 11th hour about to get on the plane, and then Theresa May, in my personal opinion, only one good thing she's done in her time, political career, was use her discretion as Home Secretary at the time to say no, we're not going to extradite him.
Why did she do that?
Out of the goodness of her heart, because she's a lovely person. No, there was a
she was having an off day.
Yeah, she was having an off day. Yeah. She
wasn't herself.
She woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Yeah. No, it was a massive campaign. The Daily Mail got involved, to their credit. They also supported me despite us having serious ideological.
Character. Why did? It was a sort of nationalist thing, wasn't it? It was like we can't allow a British citizen to be extradited.
And that's the similar reason why the Mail and the Telegraph have supported me, in that it's about, why can't a person who commits a crime in the UK be prosecuted in the UK? It's quite a simple argument. Yeah. But it was his mum, really, who tirelessly campaigned. She wrote to everyone in the House of Lords, I think, million MPs. She got celebrity musicians and actors involved. And eventually the public pressure was so strong that she used her discretion. After that, they introduced what's called the forum bar. So that's a reason not to extradite, and it sort of says if it's in the interest of justice to prosecute domestically, then there should be no extradition, and that was introduced after Gary McKinnon. And then in the intervening time, this is 2013, 2012 maybe, they introduced the law. In those intervening 3-4 years until last February, when I won my case, nobody was able to successfully plead this, because the judges, it's a sort of complicated test of 5 different things, and it's a very subjective weighting. It's kind of connections to the UK, how upset the alleged victims are, whether it be easier to prosecute in one domain or district or another. So Gary sort of set a potential precedent, but it was then never successfully built upon, and we won on the forum bar. So that's kind of cemented that.
So because of the case law in relation to your case, other hackers are now protected a lot more from extradition.
Yeah,
which is great. I think that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing.
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, it's what's made it worthwhile for me, because it's obviously quite a traumatic experience to go through. You don't want to have to live with the fact that you might spend the rest of your life in prison, 1,000 miles away from everyone you know and love, not see your partner and parents again before you die, potentially. All of that stress kind of takes a toll, but what kept me going through it was, if I can set a precedent, if I can set come to a conclusion whereby this doesn't happen again in future, then that will kind of make it worthwhile. And I know for a fact that there are people who have done more politically motivated kind of hacktivism, not people trying to defraud old ladies, and they would be facing an extradition were it not for the case that we had.
There's been some suggestions that there's some lack of parity between adjudications in relation to hackers who have been associated with Muslim extremism and hackers who are not considered Muslim extremists. Is that now going to change because of your case, or is that still going to be a problem? Is that justifiable to an extent?
So I'm conscious of the fact the only reason I'm here today and not on a plane, or past the plane bit, but in a cell in America, is because I was able to, like Gary, mount a successful campaign or have people campaign for me, and I had the privilege of being white, of being relatively middle class sounding, presentable, having parents with nice jobs, and being able to get in the papers and stuff like that. There are other people that don't share those privileges, and especially in the wake of 9/11, but even to this day, if there's a notion that the offending is somehow related to terrorism, then you're in for a much harder time. So there's a particular case of a guy called Saeed Talha Hassan, and he was extradited. Again, it was computer related. He was accused of helping run a website that was alleged to be jihadi, and they fought his extradition, and again he failed in all of the cases. It was a massive campaign, but it didn't convince the courts. And the minute he got to America, the case completely fell apart, and the judge sent him back and actually had a go at the Department of Justice for making such a vexatious prosecution. But it was obviously quite an ordeal to go through that, and the only reason he got to the stage where the judge threw it out was because he had the courage to actually contest it. Whereas, as I said before, most people just fold and take the plea bargain, so he could have gone to jail. And there's other cases. So
that was before your case.
That was before my case. Yeah. So the benefit of having won this, set this precedent, is it will then extend a kind of safeguarding benefit to other people who don't have the same privilege, who might be more prejudiced against in the legal system because of their colour or religious adherence or other things that are outside of their control. So again, that's why it was really good for me to, bizarre way of putting it, but to take the opportunity of them trying to ruin my life to make it harder for them to ruin other people's lives, because I'm very lucky to have had the support that I did.
So now that you're not going to be extradited, what is going to happen now? You'll be prosecuted here in the UK?
Yeah, so I mean, so I've been on bail for 4 years pretty much, so I've kind of been under house arrest. I can leave the house, I just had to be back every night and report to the police station twice a week, and not have a passport and stuff like that. So that's all over, so I've got a bit more freedom, and I have my passport back. I can't use it really because any other country I go to, there's a chance that America may not be done with this, and then they could initiate extradition proceedings against another country that I go to, or if it's a slightly less developed Western country, they could just yoink me from the airport. And they've done this in the case of one of the guys who ran the Pirate Bay website, which is a big file sharing website. They just skipped the extradition thing, and they straight up nicked him from an airport in Thailand, I think, or Vietnam, and that wasn't good.
That was right.
Gottfried Svartog from Sweden. But so I can't really travel safely, and so it's nice that I have the freedom of England and Wales. I can't even go to Scotland, which is a weird thing. They could start extradition proceedings again because it's a separate court and legal system in Scotland. Right. So that's a bit inconvenient, and I have family in Scotland. So I'm in a bizarre position of needing to get prosecuted.
You want it to hurry up?
Yeah, it's just so it's over. That's assuming this principle of double jeopardy holds, where you can't be convicted twice for the same crime. So we're, again, perversely hoping that the CPS brings a charge or a set of charges against me, and then I'll go through court. At least I'll get a trial here in the UK. I may be acquitted, I may be convicted. The main difference is, whereas I was looking at upwards, up to 99 years in prison in the US, here the maximum sentence would be 36 months, because that's as much as you can really be put in jail for under the Computer Misuse Act. And so, it's not great to be prosecuted at the best of times, but it's a lot easier to come out of the other side of a computer crime prosecution in the UK without being completely screwed over, whereas there are hacktivists in the US that are doing 10-year sentences, and again, they they didn't rip anyone off or make any money. They engaged in a political process, electronic civil disobedience, effectively, and they got the book thrown at them. So ideally, I get prosecuted, or the US agrees to give up under some negotiated settlement, or they forget about it. But then I always run the risk of getting kidnapped.
Right. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. I was just going to ask to what extent you thought. We seem to be a lot more sort of liberal and open to this issue here than in the US, but also still draconian in many ways. Like, to what extent should we have some sympathy for the authorities? Because there are genuine malign actors out there, huge fraudulent groups like the Russian business network that do want to get into our business accounts, do want to defraud us, or much more sinister stuff. And there is a justifiable sense of panic on behalf of the authorities, and not really any sort of understanding of what they should do. So, to what extent do you think we should have some sympathy for?
You do have an interest in a society in deterring criminality. You can't really kind of have the internet as an anything goes area, and we've seen how that can go quite badly, just from the way national intelligence services can use the internet quite offensively. So I'm sympathetic to the existence of law enforcement, and it's trying to maintain adherence to laws online. The problem is how you scale it and how you deal with the fact that there are no real borders on the internet. And America's way of dealing with that has been to extend their long arm of their law to cover, the entire rest of the world, and that's not going to be sustainable. And it also comes down to how well it scales, and you can't really lock up all of the people. So the Met Police release figures for the amount of crimes, and they're broken down into categories, and almost all crime, or not almost all crimes, but the vast majority of crimes now have some electronic element. And if you actually count the number of prosecutions, especially successful prosecutions, it's in the dozens, so they're not really keeping up. And so you do need to fight back against organised crime. You do need to get people to not do destructive things on the internet. But the main issue with security is it's an engineering problem, and what we need to do is build more secure systems. And the reason why there is so much insecurity is we like nice things, we like flashy, shiny things, and we like our phones to do a million different cool things and to track us around, and we like to have access to our banking wherever we are. And functionality is not actually the hardest thing when you're writing computer code. You can get the functionality right. That's an easy job. It's getting the functionality right and not having it also massively insecure in a way that you don't understand. So there's a concept in systems engineering called technical debt, and we've accrued a lot of technical debt, and that's when you've created a system, it's complex, it just gets more and more complex, and the actual understanding of it doesn't keep up. Right. And that's why they've had to have these kind of bug bounty platforms, because people, even within an organisation like Microsoft or Google, where they can afford to pay for the best and smartest, there's not enough manpower in that organisation to actually keep it secure, and so that you need to outsource to the rest of the world. We need to solve that engineering problem. You're not going to have nice things in terms of things being secure strictly by scaring the hackers. You just need to make it less possible to do that and encourage people to help rather than hinder it.
So do you think there's an element of hypocrisy that we have, in the sense that we're really outraged when Edward Snowden tells us that GCHQ and NSA have been hacking into all our stuff and reading our emails and our Facebook messages, but we'll happily offer up all our information to Zuckerberg at all times, even in the knowledge, we still do it, in the knowledge that Cambridge Analytica completely compromised that system because the security wasn't in place? Are we hypocrites?
We'd be hypocrites if we were conscious of how hypocritical we're being. But yeah, you're right in that we don't like information being collected about us, but we allow it, and we don't really have a choice but to allow it. You can't say no on the Facebook terms and conditions and then still get to use Facebook. So I understand very viscerally all of the ways in which this smartphone up there is purporting to do nice things for me, and it gives me some convenience, but it's actually also costing me. It's bleeding away my personal life, my private details, things that are used and collected by Facebook, by the mobile phone provider, by your internet service provider, the people that you get the internet from, and they collect this information, not for the fun of it. They collect it because it's monetizable, and it's the reason it has value is because it can be used to manipulate you. So on Facebook, you're not the user, you're not the customer, you're the product of Facebook. The customer is the advertisers, and you exist to have some eyeballs that look at the adverts. And even that's not the worst of it. It's the information they collect from you that is then used to build up profiles of you, and is then somehow gets lost and ends up at Cambridge Analytica, and is arguably swings an election or two. And
do you use Facebook?
I do still use Facebook, yeah, and it's a Faustian pact, like it's a Faustian bargain. I'm getting the ability to network and to interact with people, but the cost is I'm losing autonomy over my life. And so it's less that we're hypocrites, and it's more that we don't have informed consent. So when colonialists arrived in the New World and other places, and they met these lovely, largely friendly and welcoming and hospitable indigenous people, and learnt the language, and then they were like, we've got these blankets and we've got these muskets, and we'll give you these blankets and muskets. Right. And in exchange, you sign this bit of paper that, cedes your entire land for us in perpetuity. And they just didn't understand what this meant. They didn't understand the implications of making this deal. And so they kind of sold away their way of life from a lack of informed consent. And that's
so we've gone back to a feudal system online.
We're
all the sort of, the hunter-gatherers in the Caribbean, and we're sort of there getting the smallpox blankets, and we're all being taken advantage of, our land's being stolen. And how do we stop that from happening?
Well, I mean, we're serfs, and what we need to do is go through the same period of understanding how we're losing agency and autonomy, and how we're being controlled and shepherded and manipulated and profited from in an unfair way, and then do the will to power, the praxis of action to actually get those rights back. And we need to go through a parallel process to things like the Peasants' Revolt and things like Magna Carta, when the knights and the barons, said to the king, no, a bit more rights, please, a bit more, understanding of where your power ends and where our freedom begins. And hopefully we can do that on the internet without, violence and bloodshed. But at the moment, things are not great. things are not great for the people on the internet, and things are pretty good for the people that run the platforms and run the services and the intelligence agencies that kind of militarily occupy the internet. And because you can't see the tanks there, if you're in an occupied territory in the real world, it's easy to tell because there's checkpoints and there's people pointing guns at you and there's tanks and stuff like that. We have an occupied internet, and the NSA, GCHQ, sit on the massive submarine cables and hoover up all the data, and they say that they're doing it for their own good, but they're still, it's not free.
So because government is benefiting from this as well, should we not rely on them to protect us?
I don't know.
Do we need to have our own revolt?
How much do you trust your government? It depends how much you pay attention to what they do, and what they do that you don't find out about, and what they get away with. I'm not that cynical. I think the people that work at GCHQ are doing it because they think it's the right thing to do. But it's very easy, and I'm not saying this in the abstract. I'm saying this because I've experienced it. It's very easy to say, well, if I just get a bit more power, if I just get a bit more access, then I can do the right thing. Yeah.
Just before, it's a good time to go to questions, but just to say we're going to make a podcast out of this, so just let us know if you mind having your question on the podcast.
Do you think government should crack down on large companies which don't invest enough in protection from hackers? Do you think it should be the responsibility of companies like Microsoft and Google rather than the individual?
Yeah. No, you're right, actually. So when we were talking about the incentives structure earlier, I was talking about the incentives for hackers to sort of do it the right way or do it the wrong way / the fun way. But there should also be a better incentive structure for people that are custodians of data. At the moment, the reason why so much data about us is collected and siloed, and then sometimes lost, causing people real problems with identity theft, etc., is because there's no real cost to storing it. Like data, hard disks cost nothing now, and so a company will collect as much data as it can because it's monetizable, or even if they don't get any money for it, it doesn't cost anything to keep it kicking about, except it does when you lose control of it. So there's a massive credit monitoring company called Equifax, and they'll know everything about you, even if you're not in the US. They're US based, but they probably have a credit score for me, and I've never had a bank loan or a mortgage or anything like that. And they got hacked recently, and millions and millions of people's really sensitive financial information, how much debt you have, when did you not welch on a credit card thing, or are you super loaded, in which case it'd be good to rob your house and kidnap your daughter or something like that. That's all been compromised, probably sold on to criminals, and is being used, and okay, they'll get sued to oblivion, but it still won't undo the damage that it's caused. And so my way of looking at this is we need to treat storing large amounts of data similarly to storing industrial waste. And it's weird to think about the information about you being a kind of industrial waste, but the analogy is that it's great when it's being stored well, but the minute you have a breach of nuclear waste or something toxic into the environment, then it has serious consequences. And we have a regulatory and legal system in place to punish people for that, and that encourages them to do it more securely. And at the moment, it's improving. So the Information Commissioner Office is the people with responsibility for that in the UK, and they can levy a fine if you done goofed. And Talk, for instance, done goofed a couple of years ago and got hacked by a 15-year-old child in Wales, allegedly. So not, because it was hard to do it, but because they were not good at being secure. And they've been levied a huge fine, but at the moment, or at least at that point, they could only do that if you're an ISP or telecoms company or financial industry. But there are other people that collect data about you that wouldn't come under their purview, and they could only still a slap on the wrist fine, so a few £1,000s. So they're increasing this now to be up to 10% of global
So you think
revenue or
have
global
a
profit.
bit more of a hand in making sure that this data is secure in the same way as
Yeah, I mean, they can't directly do it, but they can increase the consequences of screwing it up, of there being a breach of this information, and that will encourage people to store it more securely, or, in my view, actually say maybe it's not good for us to be taking this data, because there's an analogy to the NSA finding vulnerabilities in Microsoft Windows, and instead of reporting them to Microsoft to get them fixed, thinking, well, this would be handy for us because then we can hack Saudi Arabia to check on terrorism, or we can get in these bank things to check on the criminals. And it's all great having that capability while you have exclusive access to it, but in the case of the NSA, they developed these super powerful exploits, and then they got hacked, or they lost the information, there was a leak. It's assumed widely that it was Russian spooks that got hold of it, but they were pretending to be random hackers, but then they dumped it in the public, and this is the equivalent. Like, an exploit is a way of, it's the keys to the kingdom, and if you've got an exploit against Microsoft Windows, then you can, it's like being able to open any building, stealthily get into the safe of any bank in the world, and this was just dumped in the virtual equivalent of Times Square, and suddenly all of these criminals had massive, huge weapons. It's like, took a garden back alley mugger who makes, I don't know, 100 quid by finding people and then putting a knife up to them and saying, give me your wallet. And then you give that mugger a predator drone, and they put their little dagger on the end of that, and then suddenly they can mug millions of people at once. So there is a potential cost of hoarding information and hoarding capabilities, but it's not as easily modelled because, like I said before, we like the shiny things, we like the benefit it gives us, and we're less eager and keen and predisposed to modelling how it can go wrong. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
What's the most interesting thing you've ever hacked into that you're allowed to talk about?
There's not so I can't talk about any of the things the US alleges me to have hacked into, and they would probably be more interesting things than things I can talk about. I think if there's a fun story I can tell. Yeah. My usual response to this is, it's a funny story, I'll tell you in 6 years, because that's the statute of limitation. And maybe the more interesting stuff is potentially still under potential prosecution. So
can't wait 6 years to put out this podcast.
But I'll tell you. I'll tell you, and again, this is on the basis of allegation only. But the main thing that got defaced in the campaign that I was accused of being involved in was the Department of Justice's Sentencing Commission website. So they're the Sentencing Commission are the people that create the mandatory sentencing guidelines, and that's what allowed them to take Aaron Swartz, who just downloaded too many, documents, and threaten him with 33 years in jail because all these weird power-ups they can say. If you commit a crime in a certain way, if it's a computer, then it's a sophisticated crime, and if you need a special set of skills, then it's a bigger crime. So their website got slightly defaced, and for a while you could edit it, so anyone visiting the website could just change random bits and change the sentences for a crime, and then that was a good bit of fun. And then you could enter. Have you heard of the Konami code? If you ever played like Nintendo video games, there was a certain up, down, left, right, A, B, A. Put that in, and it would enable you to do cool things on various video games. So if you went to the United States sentencing website at the time in 2013, and entered this on your keyboard, it turned the entire website into the 80s video game Asteroids. And you just had a little thing, and you could shoot things, and it would destroy the page successively as you played it, and then all the bits would fall away, and there was a big Guy Fawkes mask in the background, and so that was pretty fun. I'm trying to think, there's another story from the Lultech people that won't get me into trouble.
There's like lots of change in the internet, and probably one of the big changes that's going to happen in that whole space is how machine learning will affect things. I wonder whether, just be interested to see what you think is going to happen in that regard.
Okay. So this has been a huge. This is one of the most exciting technologies. If you're in technology in computers at the moment, a lot of money is going into artificial intelligence or machine learning. It's basically, you can go on Google and you can search for a picture of a cactus, and it finds you all the pictures of a cactus. It's because they've basically taught a computer what a cactus looks like, and the reason they've been able to achieve that is computers are fast enough and they have enough access to internet, access to data, that they can just literally every image on the internet goes through Google's, the ones it can find, and then it's classified based on hints from how human people have associated it with various words. And if you've ever had to prove that you're not a robot, it's a common thing that we have to do, slightly dystopian thing. I do it because I do so much Googling. I have to prove I'm not a robot to Google 3 or 4 times a day sometimes.
Can't we do that to Zuckerberg?
Yeah, well, that would be great, yeah. But so sometimes when you're doing that, you used to have to read a really indecipherable word that had loads of stupid squiggles through it, and then that stopped working because people used artificial intelligence to make algorithms to solve those. And so now they give you a series of tiles, and they say which one of these is a car, which one of these is a road sign, which one of these is a house. And these are not random questions. Obviously it's hard for a computer to solve, and that's why they give it to you. But what you're actually doing every time you prove you're not a robot is you're teaching the Google artificial intelligence how to drive its self-driving cars and hunt down and kill humans, 20 years in the future when the robots take over, which is a bit scary. Have armies of humans teaching, obviously not for malicious purposes, but they want to have self-driving cars because there'll be less accidents if they get it right. So it's radically reshaping the world around us. Already it's influencing the products that you see in adverts. It's influencing people you might have children with, which is a bit scary. If you use a dating website, OkCupid or a Tinder or the equivalent of that, then there is an algorithm that you don't understand that's matching you with people, and hopefully they're people that you don't instantly hate and you have some chemistry with, but you get on really well and you have a kid with that person. Then OkCupid could could be running a eugenics program, and we have no idea because they're not required to explain how that algorithm works. And I trust that they're not trying to breed out certain traits in their users, but we don't know. And the problem with artificial intelligence is it's garbage in, garbage out. So it's as good as the data you put into it. And so there have been cases. Some university created an artificial intelligence bot that would talk to you as a kind of human, and it learned from conversations that it had with people on the internet. It was a great idea in principle until you realise the kinds of people that are going to have the time to sit and talk to this robot for 2 hours, and they were silly people and juvenile people. And so yeah, within about 12 hours of this AI chatbot going on the internet, they gave an update and were saying, we're unhappy to tell you that this artificial intelligence is now a raving racist, misogynist, anti-Semite, and it learnt this. It learnt it from you, Dad. It learnt it from the people that it was interacting with, and so image classification is another way that it seems to be working. You get the functionality or the superficial functionality. If you look for a pipe, you get pictures of pipes, and if you look for a cat, you get pictures of cats, and it's pretty good at categorizing things that are pipes into pipes and things like cats into cats. But it's doing this on a very superficial level, and you can trick them. So even if you don't understand how the algorithm works, you can do adversarial trading, and it could have trained on 1 million images to separate cats from pipes, but I could subtly alter the image of a pipe and it would think it's a cat. And that's not a bad thing if you're searching, they think you want to buy a pipe and instead they show you an image of a cat. That's not the end of the world. But if we go back to our self-driving car, it thinks it's seen a road sign saying go straight ahead fast, and actually it was a road sign that says stop, that somebody put a shiny film on or something and otherwise confused it with, then people can die. And cars aren't even the worst of it. The artificial intelligence now, over the last 5 years, informs people that the US military kills with robots from afar on the basis of probabilistic information about terrorist activity, and they will drop some bombs on an area in a conflict zone in Afghanistan or Iraq, Syria, or lots of parts of Africa that they don't tell you about. And that's not because they had 100% verified human analyst intelligence necessarily. Someone will sign off on it, but it's informed by a really complicated computer system that gets things wrong. And so a wedding can get blown up because of a failure in AI to analyse the situation appropriately and to take the information. So this technology is not going to go away. We're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. Algorithms are going to dictate a lot of things about our lives, but we really need to get them right before they have a life of their own or before it's too late to do anything about them. So it's a difficult one. But so AI, good, bad, but fraught with difficulties.
Any last question? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd really like to have your opinion on the fine line between criminal and hero, because I feel like, especially the first bit of your talk, it was clearly to me being more the hero side.
Yeah.
And then going into, what do you think about it when a state, for example, or a nation is failing at having the best interest of its citizen at heart?
Yeah.
Isn't then the criminal becoming the hero by, the case of whistleblowers and all these things?
Yeah.
I'd like to see what's your balance on that.
That's a good question. So there are a lot of people who are criminalised because they engage in what I would consider to be acts of courage, of public interest. So Edward Snowden, certainly, almost undeniably now, he will probably never go back to the USA because they will want to put him in jail for a long time, and he took a huge amount of risk to inform us about surveillance that was being done in our name with our taxpayer money that was not great, or at least was definitely not by consent. other people that are hacktivists that may break into a website, but again are not doing it for their personal gain, but to protest against a situation. Or Aaron Swartz downloading all those articles because he might have thought the information needs to be free, and then being demonised. The difficulty with the online sphere is, again, that we haven't imported all of the protections that we have in the outside world. So it's understood that there is a right to protest in the streets. There are situations where civil disobedience is understood to be for a greater cause. So when the civil rights activists in America went to the Woolwich lunch counter and got told you can't eat here because you're black and we only serve nice white people here, and they refused to leave, and they were arrested and put in jail and attempted to be prosecuted or beaten up by the cops, but it was for a noble cause, and in the end they got the Civil Rights Act, and history looks back on that as being good. It was great that they achieved this improvement in civil liberties through the use of civil disobedience. There's not really a space to do that online, and so if you try and have the equivalent of a demonstration against a website, you are treated as a criminal and you can be facing years and years in prison. And I do a lot of real life protesting, and I've never been to a protest and thought I might end up spending the rest of my life in prison for this, but that is the real risk you take on the internet, and this stifles dissent, and without dissent you never have reform of systems, and the law takes the view that the law has arrived and the things that are considered criminal are criminal because they're wrong, but if you look at the history of the law, it's changed, Anyway, yeah, so we've won a lot of rights and liberties through people challenging them. One that springs to mind is when I was sworn in my extradition hearing, I was offered the opportunity of giving an oath on the Bible or giving a non-religious equivalent of that, and that wasn't a thing at one point, and everyone had to swear on the Bible. If you didn't swear on the Bible, you just went straight to the gallows, and the Quakers at some point decided they weren't going to do it because Jesus says in the Bible at some point, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, and don't swear on holy things. And so they refused to, and they were just being arrested on small things that they wouldn't have had serious consequences for, but as a point of principle, they didn't take the oath. A few of them were killed. Eventually killing them became unsustainable, and now we have the right to do an affirmation instead of an oath. And that seems very trivial because it's just a different word and a different gesture that you do. But it's the same with the suffragettes who smashed windows, committed property damage, jumped onto the horse race, the escort race, I think was the one where the suffragette died, and as a consequence of that, we have women's liberation, we have the franchise, the ability to vote. So unless we actually create a space within which you can dissent and it be part of the system by which the law improves, we're going to go further down this route towards not good things. The internet being an instrument of control, and our civil liberties dwindling. So, yeah, I think it's a good question. But the line is fine, and I don't think it's always clear cut. So in my case, if I am found to be guilty of having, under UK law, of having done naughty things at a political protest, then I will accept the consequences of it, because I don't really have a choice necessarily. Well, I could just scarf it now, but it is. It's sometimes necessary to stand up and do something, and to do it by the means, the tactics and the strategy that you think is going to work, and then to deal with the inconvenience that it might cost. So, but it's one thing if that's a year in prison, a year and a half in prison. If it's literally the rest of your life, then people are not going to elect to make a stand. And the minute people stop making a stand, then tyranny wins. So.
I think that's a really good place to end it, and I think that's a really good question, because it is really admirable that you have taken a stand. I mean, we're living in this world where the whole social contract is broken down online, and we're living in this sort of chaotic, brave new world, and it's people like you that are risking your freedom, essentially, to show us this. And well done for creating a piece of case law in the UK that might protect people like you in the future. Yeah. So thanks a lot. Very well. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you to Lauri Love, and thank you to Shoreditch House for hosting that event. And rate, review and subscribe to News Roast. See you soon.